Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Keinecker, and we've reassembled the team. Gentlemen, welcome back to the program. Of course, what brought us together initially was maybe not the best thing, obviously, the great tragedy of the war in Israel. And I really feel like I've told people that, first I showed up on Nehemiah's program, Nehemiah's Wall, the morning of the war broke out, rolling out of bed, next thing you know, in my pajamas, basically talking to Nehemiah as he had been in the bomb shelter a few times already that day. And so I just think it's really important that we remember why we got together for these conversations and why these conversations are happening. That this nihilistic death cult attacked the sovereign state of Israel, slaughtered women and children, kidnapped them, and committed unspeakable atrocities that we have not seen since the Holocaust. Okay, that's the starting point. That's what we need to remember, okay? So I think that's important that we have this perspective. Now, recently, my friend, and she is my friend, Cara Burrell, who does the YouTube channel Nuancehoe, I had a guest on, and they decided to basically take on Jabra. They had opinions that they wanted to give about Jabra. And Cara actually mentioned to me, she said, yeah, we have some issues with that Jabra guy one time. And I was thinking, well, have you watched all my stuff on Israel? And I don't know if she did, and I don't know if she's watched all my episodes. I doubt it. But I think that what we've done on this program, talking to all the different voices that we've talked to, I think we've made a very important contribution to the dialogue and the conversation to hear a lot of different voices. Before we get started, I just want to welcome back to the program Dr. Nehemiah Gordon. Welcome back, sir, of Nehemiah as well.
Thanks for having me.
I want to thank Jason Olson. Jason, of course, author of The Burning Book. And Jason, that's still the #1 watched video on the channel. I think across 38,000 views, people are still watching that video, reading the book. Jason, you got your PhD at Brandeis. Tell us what you got it in.
Yeah, my PhD is in Near Eastern and Judaic Studies, and my fellowships were through the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies. So I'm a trained Israel Studies scholar.
Okay, and welcome back to the program, Jason. Jabra.
Thank you.
I just realized I got together with a gentleman by the name of Casey Kern, who flew in from Korea the night before, and I finally got to meet Casey, and he told me that you actually used to work for his father. You know the Kerns?
Yes, Paul.
Yeah.
So Casey is Paul's son. I know.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. His father was my first boss.
Wow. And
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and Casey's such a great guy. Of course, we've been working on trying to save the Mormon cave at Miners Hill. That's been our little project that we've been working on. Apparently a buyer has been found, folks, but I will give you more. I don't have permission from Don Bradley to give more information. So when we do have information, I'll put it out there. Jabra, what is your education background?
So I started as an economist, studied economics and finance, and then did my master's degree in something called applied economics at BYU. And my PhD is in something called evaluation, inquiry, measurement, and so it's educational inquiry, measurement, and evaluation, which is a mix of qualitative and quantitative research background. And I specialized in something called learning theory, with a focus on how people belong to communities, which involved a lot of studying of immigration, geopolitics, even business management and all sorts of things. My dissertation defense committee had people from 5 different fields in it. Okay. So, but yeah, that's what my PhD training is.
So now we all know Dr. Nehemiah Gordon and the contributions he's made, and he's a legend. He's the GOAT. I wanted the audience to know a little bit of Jabra and Jason's, because I really feel that the people that we have brought to the table here come here with some you're not just throwing out spitballing opinions here. You guys have put a lot of thought into this whole thing, and you know the Middle East situation very well. All of you have lived in the Middle East. Jabra, you were born. Your family's from
born, lived in. Let me see. I was born in Kuwait and lived in 5 different Arab countries.
Yeah, and your family originally was from Bethlehem, but because of the 6 Day War, dad was out in Kuwait, so so then you became citizens of Jordan, right?
Well, yeah, when my father left in 59 on his way out, he made the wise decision to get Jordanian citizenship. And wasn't it for that Jordanian citizenship, after 67, we would have ended up, being without any passport or anything.
Okay.
So, yeah. So, and
Jabra, could I ask a question here? So you said you were born in Kuwait.
yes.
Were you ever a Kuwaiti citizen?
Nehemiah, that's a question. That's a very good question. So,
It is.
in no Arab country, so if you're a Palestinian, and regardless of where you're born, no Arab country gives you its citizenship except Saudi and Iraq. They did it for a brief period and then they stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, no, actually, to this day, so I have a brother who lives in the Emirates who actually converted to Islam, and he lives in the UAE. And at age 62, the Emiratis might just say, okay, now you have to leave the country. At 62, they kick you out. When I turned 17 in Kuwait, the Kuwaiti authorities basically said, okay, now you have to leave. Wow. And you can't stay. So this is a very important thing to understand. Unfortunately, people who, and I'm going to address that in my statement, but people who talk about the Palestinian issue, they don't really know this, that Arabs would go out in the street marching, death to the Jews, death to Israel, death to America, we want Palestine back, and all of that stuff, and say all these nice things about Palestinians. These are the same people who would not give you citizenship or allow you to become a citizen of their country, even though you're born there.
I once met this man who had, this was in 2015 when there was the big wave of immigration into Europe. And I met a man who came over with his wife from Sidon in Lebanon. He was born in Lebanon. His father was born in Lebanon. And his grandfather had been a refugee from the war in 1948 when Israel was founded, what we call the War of Independence, what I guess Palestinians call the Nakba. And he explained to me that in Lebanon, he wasn't a citizen, even though his father was born there, he was born there, or jobs he wasn't allowed to work, certain education he wasn't allowed to pursue. And he was so excited to have come to Norway because he had a child that his wife was pregnant and the child was going to be born. And he was so proud that his child would finally have citizenship after 70 or so years of his family being refugees. And it wasn't Israel that kept him as a refugee for 3 generations. It was Lebanon that kept him as a refugee for 3 generations. There are Palestinians who live in Israel, over 1 million, who are citizens, who have the right to vote, who have full rights. And they're actually the only Palestinians in the Middle East that actually the only Arabs, I think, in the Middle East, who have full civil rights.
I told Jason that just a few minutes ago. I know. And that's the thing. And of course, in a short program like this, we can't possibly talk about all the context that underlies it. But as I said, I've lived under several dictatorships and regimes in the Middle East. And you, especially as a Christian Palestinian, you have extremely limited rights. And I've believed for a decade or so now. I mean, the knowledge came gradually. I was indoctrinated in the thinking, the anti-Israel Nakba thinking for many decades of my life. But I think September 11th woke me up a little bit. Reflecting on my life woke me up even more. And the recent events was like, okay, I just need to take this off of my chest and just say it out loud.
Okay, well, Jabra, so real quick, I just want to share with the audience real quick. Okay, so what Jabra's going to be responding to this episode that was on Nuancehoe, and that's Cara Burrell, and she is a friend, and we're responding to this. They actually took my thumbnail and put it on their thumbnail, and there's Jabra. They had him, sticking out there, and it's reaction. Ex-Mormons respond to Zionist Palestinian Mormon. Yikes!
I know. Okay.
And so I thought it was interesting because Cara told me that she was going to do something, and I in my mind I thought, okay, I would want to know why is that a Palestinian Christian who is now a convert to Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who until not that long ago was pro-Hamas.
No, I was never pro-Hamas, by the way. My political theory has always been there
Okay.
needs to be, I mean, I've evolved. I probably for a short period of time, I looked at Hamas, okay, there is resistance.
Okay.
They need, but anyway, okay.
Okay, so yeah, you have maybe more sympathy for Hamas that you don't have now.
Sympathy,
okay.
definitely, but
okay.
sympathy.
But
only.
why would the question I would be posed to is if I'm trying to research somebody would be why would you be taking the positions you would be, and I would want to delve into it and I want to learn about it. So Jabra, I want you to respond to this video because it's you in particular. They actually kind of go after me a little bit, and one of the questions I asked. That's fine. I'm a podcaster. I'm a big boy. Jabra, why don't you give your statement? I'm giving you the platform here so you can respond to that video, and hopefully we can actually have constructive dialogue about it as well.
Yeah, sure. So, just addressing it from the beginning, from the title, when I saw it, I had to chuckle a little bit, Mormon, Zionist, Palestinian, because yes, I'm a Mormon. Of course, the word Zionist is meant to be used as pejorative, and it's not to me because as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I am a Zionist. I believe in the concept of Zion. I believe in the gathering of Israel, the literal gathering of the Jews to their ancestral lands, as well as gathering all the members of whoever chooses to embrace the restored gospel, who become adopted into Israel, gathering them to the fold of the Church of Jesus Christ. So I am a Zionist and I am a Palestinian. And unfortunately, that's where the recognition of me stopped, because they didn't mention my name once in the video, which is kind of dehumanizing. But what I find interesting is that even though they say Palestinian, they go after me not without any apparent knowledge of my history. I don't think my history is out there. They could have searched my name, found my PhD dissertation, my master's thesis, where I talk a little bit about my personal history because it was important as a background. They could have learned a little bit more about me, where I come from. I have a few Facebook pages that they could have referenced, but instead they chose to take just the interview that you had, and in the worst intellectual way, take some of my arguments out of the framework and context that I've built into the video, which is mainly the Latter-day Saint, gospel, Christian perspective, and they took these things out of context and addressed them. But here is like when I teach, I actually had to print it out to have it in front of me. So just for Laura's benefit, when you want to talk about something, there are 4 pitfalls that you shouldn't fall into. First, you shouldn't criticize. So you shouldn't say, blame someone, and whether it's me or the United States or Israel or anything, you shouldn't criticize. You shouldn't be defensive and basically there is a victim and there is a villain, because that was their approach about Hamas. Oh, poor Hamas, they are victims of big bad Israel wolf. And then there is, and I felt that was directed towards me, there is the whole contempt and basically the patronizing, condescending, what for a lack of a better word right now, explanations that they made. I was listening to this and I was thinking, wow, they can learn a lot about logical fallacies and argument because there's a lot of emotion to appeal. And of course, once you hear someone trying to present an intellectual argument using words like bullshit and stupid to characterize the person they're talking about, you realize that, and I'm going to be very generous in my words here, their whole presentation was shallow and lacked any substance and full of hubris, okay? And it was taken out of context, taken out of the larger context, and which is the context of nonviolence, Christian love, gospel. But that is the problem with, and I think they characterize themselves as atheists. And I immediately remembered Chris Hedges's book, I Don't Believe in Atheists. Now, I'm sure if they are on the left, they know who Chris Hedges is. If not, then they can go check him out. But in his book, I'm going to read it from his book, he says, the agenda of the new atheists is disturbing. These atheists embrace a belief system as intolerant, chauvinistic, and bigoted as that of religious fundamentalists. And ironically, they describe themselves as atheists, and that's how they come across to me. They were bigoted against Israel, bigoted against Palestinians, actually, and condescending to Palestinians. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. Now, here is another context that they need to know. So I don't know them from Adam. I don't know their background or life story, but I don't think they speak Arabic. I don't think they speak any language other than English. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Definitely they don't speak Hebrew. So that, and they don't have the lived historical experience I have. And here it is for them in a nutshell. I'm someone who is a diaspora Palestinian. I grew up in Kuwait, and I'm a man in my 50s. I remember flashes on the TV when the 73 war happened. And I've listed all the wars actually, so that I don't forget any war that I've witnessed or I was close to. I saw flashes of the 73 war. In 78, I saw the peace treaty between Israel and Sadat. When the Iran-Iraq war was happening, I could hear the bombings every night because that's how close the war was to us in Kuwait. And I was there when the hostage crisis happened with the United States. I witnessed suicide bombings in Kuwait by Islamic radicals and fundamentalists. I've studied Islam since I was 6 years old, thoroughly. In college, I actually scored higher than Muslims, and I won awards as a teenager for papers I've written in Islam, with people not realizing I was even a Christian. Okay, so been to the West Bank many times. I was telling Jason just this afternoon the story about my grandfather, who basically lost a whole side of a mountain of land where the settlement of Gilo is currently built. And I remember sitting with him on the balcony sometimes, and sometimes under an almond tree, and watching his eyes tear up, looking at Gilo while it's being built. And his response was he didn't become a terrorist. He didn't send any of my uncles to do terrorist attacks against Gilo. He actually sent my uncles to work as construction workers on the settlement. So I know the loss of land that many Palestinians have, had. And, I was there when the 93 peace treaty happened, 94 peace treaty with Jordan happened. I was in the region. I was on college campuses when Muslim terrorists, Al-Qaeda and others would send people to Jordan to recruit other terrorists to go fight in Yugoslavia and in Afghanistan for their wars. So I've seen all of these things. And so to hear Laura and her friend, who I don't even remember who she is, lecture me and try to characterize my opinions and condescendingly, I have to say, about Israel-Palestine, I find that kind of offensive, and I find that, like, she didn't even bother to reach out to me and have a dialogue. But again, I think atheists don't like to talk to faithful people, and she kept characterizing me as a conservative. I'm not neither left or right. I'm a disciple of Christ. That's how I identify, and I try to follow that line carefully. So she and most of the arguments in those videos basically were emotional appeals. In the fog of war, you can't be certain of any data. Here is what we know about here is what I know as a Palestinian, as an American. As someone who's lived in the region, I want Laura to know that when I was talking about Muslims, yes, it might come across as Islamophobia or however you might choose to say that, but I'm giving her my personal experience, giving the people who listen to this my personal experience as a Palestinian Christian who's lived in all of these Arab countries. under different rules, had and still have many Muslim friends, have a brother who is converted to Islam. I'm telling her this, and everyone who can hear me, I'm not generalizing. Islam has a seed in it. And I'm not talking people, I'm talking the religion. It has logical, doctrinal teachings that when you read it, there is no two ways about it. It encourages you to put down minorities in your society. A Muslim society is not a society that promotes equality between people. And as a Christian, as a Jew, as a Yazidi, we've all seen what the Yazidis did with what ISIS did to the Yazidis in Iraq. We've seen what Hamas did to Israeli citizens in their homes. We've seen what the Taliban do to their people and the minorities. We're currently seeing what Muslim forces in Sudan are doing to the Masalit population. There is in Islam doctrine that is dangerous, that is anti-minorities, and that is a fact. It's not a generalization. You pick up the Quran, and which I don't know if she's ever read the Quran from cover to cover like I did many times, and I taught from the Quran, she will discover that for herself. But I don't know if she has the intellectual courage to do that because she doesn't want to burst her own intellectual ideological bubble. And that's the problem I find with many people like her, many people on the left. Now, during this week, just this week, an article came out in Newsweek by a person from Gaza. His name is Ahmad al-Khatib. Khatib is a big Gaza family. And here the title of his article, Hamas's Western apologists have become Hamas enthusiasts, right? And this is what's horrifying. His characterization when I read it is spot on. I've been looking at Twitter, Facebook, the Arab discourse, the Palestinian discourse. It's horrifying. If Laura reads Arabic, she can go ahead and read it, which I do. It's glorifying the Holocaust. It's glorifying the massacres of Jews. It's glorifying what happened in 7/10. And that's a fact. And it is spreading. And here is what Ahmad al-Khatib writes about people like Laura. And I'm going to turn my eye away from the camera for a bit, and I'm going to just read it. So he says, he talks about what activists were doing in San Francisco. And then he said, soon after, an activist pulled me aside and fiercely scolded me, saying I should never talk about the rockets that Hamas is sending out to Israel, and instead immediately pivot to the suffering of Gazans and Israel's role in what's happening. So again, this is that logical argument, the fallacy I'm talking about. Hey, poor me against this big bad wolf. This has historically been the way with Hamas apologists who disguise themselves as pro-Palestinian activists. They have a pathological aversion to discussing the faults, problems, mistakes, and grave errors of Palestinian political groups, factions, and leadership that have plagued, emphasis on the word plagued, the Palestinian national projects with countless setbacks. So the strategy was to pivot the conversation away from the group's actions and focus on Israel's reactions, the occupation, and the plight of civilians. They marginalized the significance of Hamas as a contributing factor in the overall degradation of Gazans' living conditions and erased how the group's choices and actions brought war, death, and destruction upon its people. I was always troubled, so a few explicitly told me not to air out people's dirty laundry, and I've heard that personally many, many times, and that it would be better to maintain a veneer of unity and keep the focus on Israel. And that veneer of unity, we are a society, we Palestinians, we love Christians, we love Jews, we're all united, but we're not. That is a fact. Because I know the minute Hamas takes over in Gaza, then they will turn that same violence against those 1,000 Christians who now they are mourning and are in solidarity with. And then he says, and I'm not gonna, he says, and this is a significant line, and this is what Laura was doing. I was always troubled by such recommendations, rife with inauthenticity. They also marginalized me, an actual Gazan, inexplicably demanding that I conform to the opinions and beliefs of privileged Western activists detached from what the people in Gaza actually feel about Hamas and other Palestinian groups and leaders. This is the fact. And I spoke with friends of mine, Arab Christian friends from Nazareth and from other places in Israel, and they share with me the same feelings. They don't want to go out and air it. And I think that's wrong. I think more of us should come out, like Ahmed, come out and talk about these things because they are real. But Laura can continue to live in her intellectual bubble and criticize people like me and do whatever. Now,
just to be a quick, real quick. So Cara is the name of the host, and Lindsay is
Cara and
yeah.
Lindsay. Yeah,
okay,
Cara
so I just want to make sure we have the names right. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at Yemen, you look at Syria, you look. I mean, 500,000 people. Assad killed 530,000 people were killed in Syria. Probably, I think about 40% of them were children. I don't know. Do we hear anything about it? Did people go out and demonstrate against it anywhere in the world? No one did it. The Masalit are being killed in Sudan right now. Yesterday, there was an article that said the basically situation in Sudan is on the edge of the disaster. How many demonstrations in the Arab world have we seen? Has Laura talked to any of the Masalit? We have many of them here in Utah. She can talk to them. But no, let's focus on the Israeli-Palestinian thing and blame Israel for the problems of the Arabs. Now, here is something that Cara, I'm sorry, I keep saying Laura, Cara needs to learn from history. Reagan in the 80s, he was this Western guy, and I don't know if Reagan understood really what the Taliban were about. But I remember being in college, and all of a sudden we'd have Qur'ans show up on campus being given to college students to encourage them to go to jihad in Afghanistan against the Soviets. And I picked one of those Quran ones. I was at Yarmouk University in northern Jordan. And I picked up one of the Qurans and I flipped to the back of it and it says printed in the USA. And I was, what the heck are Americans doing printing Qurans and giving them to people? And and of course we know they enabled the Taliban, and then the Taliban lashed back. They hosted Osama bin Laden, and the rest is terrible history. And I think Laura and people like Cara and people like her enable people like Hamas and Islamic Jihad and even ISIS, and who are counting on support from people like her. They are counting on it, because they appeal to emotions, they appeal to the heart and the sleeve, and people like her who are not willing to look into the data and the evidence and understand and seek understanding, like listening to voices like mine and have a discussion about it. No, they enable terrorism. And finally, I want her, of course she doesn't know Arabic, but I want you to share a link of, maybe Jason or I can share a link to the phone calls that were recorded by Hamas themselves. By Hamas, I don't know what to call them, thugs, idiots, idiot is generous for them, but bragging. I listened to this call and I cried. I couldn't believe it. This man calls his mother and father, bragging about killing Jews, killing Israelis, and there is this maniacal, psychopathic joy in his voice. Now, as an Arabic speaker, it just moved me in all kinds of negative ways and horrified me. And my body shakes when I think about it. And his parents actually are praising him. And I want her to listen to when Hamas leaders call themselves and everyone in Gaza Mashari' Shahada. They are martyrdom projects. They want those civilians to die. They encourage them to die. They tell them, they use this absolutely horrible word in Arabic, shaheed. They are not shaheeds, they are not martyrs. They are victims of cruelty and just a regime that, if it takes over, will have horror in the whole Middle East. She needs to understand that. And I'm sick of people like her enabling and babying Hamas and ISIS and just saying, oh, poor them, they live in an open air prison and all of that claptrap. They don't. Israel blocked them. Israel is a sovereign state. They have a right to block their borders. We don't want you in. We're trying to do this here in the United States against Mexico, right? Now, not that I necessarily totally agree with that, but Israel is a sovereign state that needs to protect its borders. And Egypt is more than welcome as an Arab state to open its borders for poor people of Gaza to go out and trade and leave the open air prison. But Egypt, a fellow Muslim country, whose people are marching in the millions, for the people of Palestine, and they block the borders against Gazans. That's what she needs to look into before she goes and blames the whole problems of the world on Israel. Okay, Israel isn't perfect. I think all of us here agree to that. But Israel is the state of the Jewish people. It's their home. It's their land. The history is irrelevant really to me. It's done deal. The people of that generation have died. All I know is everyone who lives there, or almost everyone, is born there. They've had children and children's children. It's a done deal. But also because of the special history of the Jewish people, that it's not just 100 years, or it's thousands of years. They need their own homeland. And I believe that. I believe that. Even as a Palestinian, I believe that. Now, the challenges for us, for Arabs and Palestinians and Israelis, to find a way to live together. And I don't have any control over Israelis. I'm not an Israeli. I'm not a Jew. I can only speak to the Arabs. I think, and given the Arab history, given the Arab ideology, given Islam itself, I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done there. To start with, we need to abandon this idea that violence and jihad, or whatever you choose to call it, will bring an end to this. And I also don't believe it's time yet for Arabs and Israelis to live in this one big, country together. It's not possible. Having seen what I've seen in my life and knowing the anti-Semitic tendencies inherent in both, Eastern Christianity, in Islam, just that thinking, it's not possible. And I don't think the Jews can trust it. I don't think Israelis can trust it. It's not time. And Arabs have done zero to build trust. I'm being completely frank. Arabs have done zero. Jason just shared with me a document today for the imams in the West Bank, and I read it, and I'm like, yeah, I grew up in Kuwait with a mosque about 300 yards away from my house, and every Friday, death to the Crusaders, which is another word for Christians, death to the Jews, death to the Zionists. I've grown up 12 years of my life, I listened to that. So I was not generalizing, Cara. I was not. I was speaking from lived personal experience, which you don't have. And if she wants to debate me, she's free to do that anytime, any place. And that's the end of my statement. I'm sorry, I probably took too much time.
Okay, Jabra, first of all, I want to thank you for coming on to share your response, which I think is only fair. I feel like we've done hours and hours of work on this channel just dealing with the Israeli issue. Of course, I'm friends with a Muslim philosopher and historian, Muhammad Jihad Ishmael, who lives in Gaza, and so I'm in communication with him as well. So I try to come to this apolitically, and I tell people, and I don't want to bring in the rest of the panel here, but one of the things that as somebody who was involved in politics at one time, I read a column by George Will, and he's a conservative columnist, but he was an atheist. And he said, and I support Israel for non-theological reasons. And I thought to myself, okay, being raised in an evangelical world, we're kind of pro-Israel, right? In much the same way that Mormons are. So I thought, okay, I need to be able to come up with a defense of Israel. If I'm going to support Israel in the secular world, I can't just come to quoting Bible scriptures. I have to be able to understand what Israel is all about. And if you look at Israel, Israel is a liberal democracy. It's a progressive society that was founded like as a socialist nation, essentially. I mean, it's a progressive dream. And women and gays served in the militaries decades before they did in the United States. And all the people are afforded all these rights. And there are Arabs and there's different Druze and other ethnic groups that serve in the IDF, and they have full citizenship. They have representation in parliament. So to me, Israel should be a model of how you can have liberal democracy in the Middle East, because they have been able to achieve it. And so to me, that's, as if anything, Israel should be the progressives' beacon of how you can have a society that a progressive would be. Look, when these left-wing activists, like that guy that had sex with that other guy in the U.S. Senate chamber there, and he had said "Free Palestine" to that Republican congressman, and now he's just been fired from Senator Ben Cardin's office, but posts this video of him having sex and with another man. Now, if that was in Gaza, he would have been killed on the spot, or in any Arab country, and here he is supporting Hamas and supporting. I mean, that's just insane to me. That's why I don't even understand the left anymore. It doesn't even make sense anymore to me.
No.
And I get accused of being a progressive myself. I tell people, I'm just classical conservative, classical liberal, libertarian. That's all I am. But my goodness, it's crazy to me.
It
and
is.
So yeah.
Steve, here is another fact for Cara to look at. Have her Google International Religious Freedom Report and look at the index. Look at how many Islamic countries are there on that index. I'm not generalizing. I'm actually speaking about a fact. Every Islamic country, every Arab country has at the top of its constitution, when we were kids studying history and geography and all of that, they would teach us that. Every Arab country has a constitution that starts with the phrase, the constitution of this country is based on Islam. Now, on Islam, the Quran, etc. And once you say that, and then you say, okay, we're going to give some human rights, we're going to give some religious freedom rights, but you look at it, in every Arab country I've been in, those rights are circumscribed. For example, Christians can't build new churches. And if they do, it's very limited in what they can do. And you can't even renovate your church. Like in Egypt, the Coptic church can't renovate most of their churches because Egypt, the Egyptian government, doesn't give them that right. Conversion to another religion, at best case scenario, in all Arab countries, you get dragged into police stations and you're interrogated on a regular basis once you declare your conversion. So, and of course, because she's an atheist, this probably wouldn't resonate with her. But what I want to say is, if there is no religious freedom, there is no other freedom. Most freedoms are gone. Like, you can't think, like, even atheists like her, yeah, they would be shunned. Like, atheists even get it worse.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, and atheism, we know, like, there is a famous episode of South Park that talks about Nehemiah. This is a show when, some TV channel here, it's very funny, criticizes.
I'm familiar with the Mormon episode.
Okay. They did an episode about atheists, and they portray atheism as a religion with Richard Dawkins as its prophet, And what you probably don't know, Nehemiah, is that the creators of South Park are ex-Mormons. That's why they do a lot of stuff about
I did
Mormons.
not know that.
Yeah, they portray Mormon missionaries, and they are the ones who did the Book of Mormon play on Broadway.
So I went to that musical recently with my wife, and we were so disgusted we walked out.
Yeah,
it was. And look, I'm not a Mormon, never been a Mormon, but it was so offensive. We just got up and left.
That's the
which I've
ex-Mormon
never done
route
ever.
for you.
I've
Yeah,
never
that's
been
Well,
to a musical.
Wow.
if you open up the playbill, there is an ad from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. If you like the play, why don't you read the book?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
So you can have a sense of humor about it.
I think that's so important. And
But
again,
Steve, here is one thing you need to read about atheists in the Book of Mormon. I want you to look the word Korihor.
Korihor, Nehor, those are my homies.
Yes, Korihor and Nehor. So you know who Korihor and Nehor is. I think that was the most brilliant part of the Book of Mormon. Maybe Nehemiah at some other episode would read their stories to us. But Nehemiah and Korihor were your typical atheists. And they've set, I mean, the Book of Mormon sets the framework for studying atheists once you read about Korihor and Nehor. And Korihor and Nehor basically knew the truth. They just chose, based on their own interests or whatever it was, to portray one thing that they thought is the truth. But when the moment of truth came, they abandoned their ideas. But Korihor and Nehor are your typical atheists, and they conform to that Chris Hedges characterization of them. And you find it reflected. And I think people like the South Park creators and the Book of Mormon play creators, they portray some of those things. Anyway, off the subject.
We're off the subject. So, and of course,
Yeah.
I knew this would happen, but that's okay. That's okay. So I wanted to get Jason and Nehemiah in this conversation. Nehemiah, I actually kind of, since you're kind of an outsider, maybe give a little bit of your perspective on this. You watched the video. Maybe kind of give some of your thoughts on this. You didn't know who Nuancehoe was. You didn't know. You just watched the video, and I remember getting on the phone with me.
I still don't know who she is. But I could say it's kind of stunning to me that someone with the name Nuance in the title of their channel seems to have virtually no nuance. For example, this whole accusation of Jabra being Islamophobic, and in general, if you're pro-Israel, you're Islamophobic. So let's talk about some nuance. So we talked about how I mentioned before, I think in the previous program, maybe that or even in this program, how Israel has over 1 million Arabs who are citizens of the country and have full rights, and over 90% of those, I believe, are Muslims. And there I'm going to disagree with Jabra, because it's actually happening that Jews and Muslims are living in coexistence. Now, not the people who are under the rule of the Palestinian Authority, they want to wipe us out, but the ones who are Israeli citizens. Hamas was hoping they would rise up against Israel and attack Jews, and that hasn't happened. Instead, they are, I mean, one of the things that's really touching to me and moving is I see this video where there is a Jew who has his talit and his phylacteries on, and he's praying, and next to him is a Muslim on the prayer rug praying, and they're both donning the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF uniform. They're both loyal citizens of the state of Israel, and they say, we're defending our country. That's what the Muslims who are citizens of Israel say. So this Islamophobia is a red herring, and it's an expression of absolutely no nuance. And I've got some other things to say, but let's let Jason talk, because I know he's got some things to share.
Yeah, Jason, you want to talk kind of maybe about the political makeup of how, if you were going to put Hamas in a political perspective, maybe to share that with the group, with the audience.
Yeah, no, thank you, Steve, Nehemiah and Jabra. Always have to preface, I am not speaking on behalf of the United States or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But I was recently at a conference, academic conference, and there's a major scholar. His name's Dr. Jeffrey Herf. And like a trained scholar, I have to cite my my source, so I'm not plagiarizing here. But he opened my mind to this amazing point. He's a scholar of the Holocaust, and he's also a scholar of how Nazi propaganda fed into the Arab world, including Haj Amin al-Husseini in the early 20th century, who was actually an ally of Hitler. Haj Amin al-Husseini was the leader of the Palestinian resistance movement at the time, an Islamic leader, and he even he went to Berlin and offered his support to the Nazi cause. Of course, we all know the Nazis were a far right-wing, fascist, anti-Semitic organization. So Jeffrey, what he opened my mind to, that just an angle that I had never considered, is this clearly is right. Hamas and its allies are far right wing, fascist, imperialist, anti-Semitic organizations. That they, just because they're geographically located in the Middle East and they're run by Arab people, we have this blinder on that Arabs cannot be far right wing, they cannot be fascist, they cannot be imperialist, because the nature of the West and the East. Well, let's just zoom all the way out, right? You can find the political spectrum, the global political spectrum in any civilization. So what is Hamas's goal, right? When we say Hamas is fascist, of course it's a religious fascist organization, and Jabra has been pointing this out. They have no tolerance for minorities, any kind of minority. They have no tolerance for LGBT communities. They have no, they seek to put women in subjection. They're a very, 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 very far right wing fascist organization, and totalitarian. Just because they're located in the Middle East and they're run by Arabs, that we shouldn't be thinking in terms of race. We need to be thinking in terms of ideas. And they're imperialist. Okay, the right people on the far left, progressives, right? They are thinking, oh well, Gaza is so small and it's just such a tiny little enclave. But okay, but the ideas inside of Hamas, inside of Gaza, they have a grand imperialist mission. They want to conquer, they intend to conquer the state of Israel, destroy the state through any kind of violence. I mean, this is the most brutal form of imperialism. It's not your soft kind of, soft British imperialism. It's brutal. You murder, rape, pillage, whatever it takes to expand your empire into that territory. And Hamas leaders have said, once we take back all of Palestine from the river to the sea, we're going to move on to the rest of the world. They have a global imperial ambition. I just sent Jabra some of those, from Palestinian Media Watch and Memory. You can find it the evidence very clearly. So there's imperial ambition. So that the fact that we have, far left-wing progressive Americans, people born and raised in the United States, who are allying themselves with a far right-wing fascist, imperialist, religiously supremacist, ethnically supremacist organization, is mind-boggling. You've got to have some integrity. I'm calling for integrity, right? If you have a set of ideas and ideology, it should be consistent wherever you look in the world, and you've got to have values. So I call upon Cara and Lindsay to have some values. What are your values? Right? We can discuss that, because this is haphazard, right?
Jabra said something that I actually thought was profound and got me thinking. So he gave the example of when he was at Yarmouk University and they were handing out the Qurans, and he implied, he didn't quite say it, that it was the CIA, essentially. Sounds like that's what you were implying, Jabra, that was inciting Muslims to go fight in Afghanistan, which was very convenient in the 80s because no Americans had to go die in Afghanistan fighting the Soviets. It was the jihadis. And I remember the T-shirts when I was a kid, which would say, "I am a mujahideen," proudly, right? And Rambo 3, the character goes to Afghanistan to fight alongside essentially Al-Qaeda against the Soviets. And it got me thinking, so and I don't know these two ladies who did the program, but they're part of this broader phenomenon of this woke left. And I'll add one more word to that, the anti-Semitic woke left, because there's Jews who are in the woke left who are realizing, okay, we're not part of this. So this anti-Semitic woke left is using the children of Gaza and jihadis to fight against their big enemy. And their big enemy is the evil imperialist colonialist power, Israel, right? In their minds, Israel is this white European colonialist project, even though we just finished Hanukkah, which took place in the year 168 to 165 BCE, where Jews were in the same country fighting against another imperialist power, the Seleucid Greeks. But in their mind, the Jews are this imperialist, colonialist power, and if they can get the Gazans and Hamas to fight against the Jews, they're really like the CIA. We don't want to go do it, but let's get somebody else. And who suffered from that in Afghanistan? It was the children of Afghanistan. And now it's the children of Gaza who are suffering. And look, that breaks my heart. I'm an Israeli, I'm a Jew. And I pray daily for the children of Gaza who are being used as human shields by Hamas. It's their objective for children and women and innocent civilians to die of their own people. And that is a war crime that shouldn't be underestimated. So they want to blame Israel. They want to say it's Israel indiscriminately bombing. Well, that's a lie. If Israel wanted to end the war on October 8th, they could have. They could have carpet bombed Gaza. Everyone, 2 million people would be, they wouldn't need to kill 2 million people. Kill 1 million people. Gaza would have surrendered, just like the Japanese in World War II. And they would have, but then that's an atrocity we wouldn't do. And I don't know if people realize this, but over 1,500 Israeli soldiers have been wounded and maimed. Right? We hear about the people who die, the Israeli soldiers, but we have an entire generation of young people who have lost hands and feet fighting in Gaza. And the reason that Israel is willing to absorb that loss is because the alternative is we carpet bomb Gaza and kill 1 million people and the war's over. The rest surrender. So we are essentially accepting a generation of maimed people because we are going house to house trying not to kill civilians. And these radical leftists, they're really just like the CIA in the 80s. Let somebody else go die and attack our enemies.
And here is more to your point, and you can think of it, and they can think of it too. Imagine if Assad or the Sudanese Rapid Response Forces right now had the kind of military prowess and resources that Israel has. I remember, again, not witnessed it directly, but read the newspapers, watched the news footage. It's alive in my mind as it is today. When Assad, the people in Hama, it is a Syrian city, rebelled against him. Assad's response at the time, he had the latest MiG fighters from Russia and he had the military prowess. He razed the whole city overnight. 20,000 people died overnight, and the Muslim Brotherhood revolution in Hama ended. That's what Arab governments do. And I promise you, if like Hamas had the same military kind of prowess and resources, they would use it to the fullest extent. So yes, if Israel is acting, it is war. Hamas asked for this war. They did the worst things they could do, knowing exactly how Israel will respond. My heart breaks for the children. I stopped watching videos of children because it just tears my heart. But Hamas asked for this, and the Israeli media tells them every day what the solution to this is. It's very easy. Their pride prevents it. The solution is return the hostages and surrender. That's it. And all of the suffering will end. All of the suffering will end. But they will not do it. They will not do it. And I think this will not end. They will fight to the very last Gazan. And this will not end until they run out of people. But the population is also, we say human shields and stuff, but this whole empathy, children dying, all of that's a part of their arsenal. They are using them. They are using them as weapons. To the point, I don't know, Nehemiah or Jason or Steve, if you read this book by David Horowitz. It came out right after September 11th. It's called Unholy Alliance. And I just looked up the tagline to it. It's called Radical Islam and the American Left. I think I should reread it. I read it 20 years ago. Yeah, David Horowitz got vilified, called an Islamophobe. They went after him really hard. And in that book came out right after 9/11. And I think he addresses the questions the issues we talk about here, because the American left has this humanist tradition, or and they, I think it misleads them. It misleads them. They don't understand Islam very well. They don't understand Islamic ideology very well,
Yeah.
or history. They understand it from a pure academic perspective. And I'm not saying we should deal in prejudice, but I think we should always look at what other people are saying. I think the left in the United States and Europe never bothered to talk to Christian Jewish minorities who lived under Islamic rule, or Kurds or Yazidis or Armenians or anyone. The Orientalists went to the Middle East, and they focused mainly they looked at everyone as Muslim, and they didn't look at the minorities. They ignored the minorities and their plight. And they ignored, for example, under the Ottomans, there is this image of Jews and Christians and Muslims lived all together like big one happy family, right? But no talk of the second and third level status that Muslims and that Christians and Jews and Druze and all of those minorities had under Ottoman rule. They were tolerated, but they were not considered as equal members of those societies. They were not, and they never were. And under the current mindset, they never will. A few months ago, Rabbi Ilhanan Miller, he's on YouTube, he speaks Arabic, and he does all of this outreach to Arabs and tells the stories of Mizrahi Jews. And I love watching him. He interviewed a Saudi guy who reads the Torah, who's a friend of the people of Israel, who believes in the state of Israel. And Ilhanan asked him a question, and he said, so are you for Jews living in a Saudi or a UAE society as equal citizens? And his response, his gut response was, we will give them some rights. And I'm like, you missed the whole point. It's not you giving them some rights. No, you give them all the rights, everything. You don't deprive them of any rights. The rights are like inherited. They are given to us by God. And you're not the one dispensing them. They are not like money you give away or something. So that is why I'm very skeptical about right now about the Muslim world in general being open to these ideas. I mean, again, what bothered me with their video most was that they accused me of generalization, which I try hard to avoid. Sometimes I fall into it, but I try hard to avoid it. Just have them Google the Al-Azhar recent statement on the conflict in Gaza. And they have this long statement that basically says the Israeli civilians who were killed in the kibbutzim were occupiers, not civilians, which is basically saying, the Hamas was all right killing all of them.
Tell the audience who Al-Azhar is. I'm not sure most of them.
Al-Azhar is the Vatican of the Muslim world. They are the ones who have the power to issue fatwas that most Muslims abide by. They train most of the imams in the mosques in Egypt, and I think most of the Arab world. They are the authority. They are the Islamic authority. Islam doesn't have like a Vatican or a church headquarters. The Azhar is as close as it comes to, and their statements are authoritative, and imams refer to them. So when Al-Azhar issues a statement, it horrified me when I saw it. I was like, wow, what planet are they on? Like to say civilians are occupiers. Those are babies, women, children, people who know nothing other than the land of Israel. Yeah. I mean, by every standard, they are not occupiers anymore. And this is coming from a Palestinian person. These people are not occupiers. They have as much right to the land as anyone else. They are citizens of that land. They live on that land. We have to drop that occupier language.
Yeah, I think we should. I mean, this is something that I was deeply trained in. I think I've mentioned to you my professor, one of my closest professors, like a father to me, Professor Elon Troen at Brandeis University. He's since gone back to Ben Gurion University in Beersheba in Israel. I mean, he's, his daughter and son-in-law, Shachar or Deborah and Shlomi, they were murdered by Hamas in their bomb shelter on the Israeli side of the border of Gaza. I mean, and I was close to Elon's children as well. But one of Elon's great contributions to the scholarship is about this question of indigeneity, and that Jabra's getting at. When Allstar says all these Jews are occupiers. Okay, not only is that anti-Semitic, but it's also anti-Judaism. See, if we want to be truly progressive and truly pluralistic and acknowledge Islam and Christianity and Judaism and Baha'i, and all the different religions, right? There is only one piece of land territory where Jewish people are indigenous, even if we stripped it of religion. The four holy cities, Jerusalem, Hebron, Tiberias, and
Gaza
and
is the
Sfat.
fourth. No, actually, it's Sfat and Gaza. Gaza is the fourth.
And
one.
Gaza. Okay, okay, maybe a different interpretation. Yeah, there are ancient synagogues in Gaza. Yeah,
this was in the Middle Ages when Gaza was a major center of Jewish learning and particularly of Jewish Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll finish my point. Is just there are Jewish, unbroken Jewish communities and cities in the land of Israel where Jews have always physically lived. Now, okay, Jews were a minority before, the late 19th century. When even up until the mid 20th century.
Jews were a majority in Jerusalem as early as 1864.
Yes.
Yeah. So in the case of Jerusalem, but we're talking about the entire land. Okay, we can all acknowledge the entire land. Jews were minority, but they were there. So if we really want to zoom out, all Zionism was building up a Jewish majority through immigration, because Jews were already there. How can you call this occupying? How can you call this secular colonialism, settler colonial? How can you call this imperialism when all the Jewish people did was they sought to build a homeland by going from minority to majority. So Al-Azhar that's out of control to even say that at all. Where are Jews supposed to go? The point is the anti-Semitic telos. Well, Jews aren't supposed to go anywhere. Jews are supposed to die, which is the connection to Nazism. I am accusing Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood. They are the descendants of Nazis, but they're worse. Hamas is worse than Nazis because they're not ashamed of their anti-Semitism. The Nazis were polite. They tried to hide their crimes. Hamas doesn't try to hide it at all. They blast it through TikTok. So Hamas is worse than Nazis, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. So let me just say a couple of things here. Just address two things that they said in their video, and that really bothered me, and it touches on anti-Semitism. But first, Nehemiah, I want to say to you that the Muslims of Israel are probably the best experiment we have right now on how you can de-Islamize Muslims, and by living in a society that grants rights. And one day I would love to study that.
I think what makes them so loyal to Israel is they look around at Syria and at Lebanon and Jordan and the Palestinian Authority ruled up by the Fatah, the PLO, and they're like, wow, I don't want to be ruled by those guys. Here under Israel, I got health care and I can vote.
I can worship.
Right. I
I
can
can
worship
be
any way I want.
any Islamic sect I want, I can be.
Right.
Yeah.
And the alternative is, wow, if I'm ruled by the Palestinian Authority and I speak out against the government, they'll come beat me up
Yes.
and maybe kill me.
Exactly. And they look at someone like Ahmad al-Taibi showing up in the Knesset, yelling and screaming, and they're like, you can't do that in the Arab world. He would be dead the next day. Someone would send him to a dungeon. No one would ever hear from him again. But in that podcast, basically they said they addressed my point about the Holocaust and about whole generations of Jews just disappearing and not being able to trace them, the millions of people who died. And they basically said something like, oh, well, let him look at what's happening in Gaza. It's the same. And I was driving and I just lost my direction at that point, because I was like, how dare they? How dare anyone? Like, yes, what's happening in Gaza, it's horrible and terrible, but that showed me their complete lack of understanding of the Holocaust and the just the tragedy that is the Holocaust. I mean, you're talking about whole villages disappearing, whole people disappearing. No one knows where they are. I mean, I suggest they go to the Yad Vashem or just visit Israel and go to the Holocaust Museum in DC and just take a tour to understand. You can't compare. You can't compare like what's happening in Gaza and accusing Israel of doing to the Gazans what Hitler did. There's no gas chambers. There's none of that stuff. This is war. Hamas asked for it. This is what they should have expected. I'm sorry that war is so messy, that civilians die. It is horrible. It's not what God wants. But this is war. This is the consequences of Hamas's act on 7/10. You have to accept it. You have to be a realist. And so that's the one thing that they said. And Nehemiah, I saw you wanting to say something.
Yes, so remember that Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas in Gaza, and his cronies are hiding like rats in their tunnels. And
Exactly.
I sent you the
Children
video
die.
after the last program we did where they openly said the tunnels aren't for the civilians, they're for us.
Yes.
To defend us. The civilians, they're the responsibility of Israel and the United Nations.
Exactly. I know. It's
So the
terrible.
people responsible for the death of those civilians is literally Hamas, and that is a war crime that they should be prosecuted for.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
I was in support tactically, right? Just my own personal opinion, tactically of Israel putting seawater into the tunnels. The brilliance of that tactically is that is where Hamas is operating, right? And Israel has three different tactical approaches. It's got the aerial bombardment, which has been complicated, and because when you're doing, you're exposing a lot of civilians to risk. So Israel took the step after 15 years, which it's been reluctant to do because of Jewish attachment to life, to do a ground invasion. Well, the ground invasion is now very tragically exposing Israeli soldiers and more Palestinian civilians to deaths. But you can, when you're doing a ground invasion, you can be more surgical, right? You're only shooting at people, shooting at you. But the tunnels is only the domain of Hamas. So from my perspective, tactically, the flooding out those tunnels, that's you're directly targeting Hamas. And if you have a conscience and you see this like the Greatest Generation did in the war between the United States and the Nazis, you've got to wipe out the Nazis, right? And they are located actually under the earth. So I mean anybody, I mean that's, I think, the way forward.
Another thing we should point out, and here's again the lack of complete lack of nuance. Israel isn't just shooting ducks in a barrel. Hamas is fighting back. They're firing rockets. I have the statistic here. Over 12,000 rockets have been fired against Israel. There's a percentage of them that fall on Gaza, and hundreds of them have fallen on Gaza. One of them is the famous hospital. Within moments, the entire world blamed Israel, and it was later proven what Israel knew within a few hours when they checked, they're like, okay, was this us? No, it was the Palestinian Islamic Jihad that was firing from a cemetery behind the Al Ahli hospital, and the rocket fell actually in the parking lot of the hospital, killed about 10 people. So let's remember, there's a percentage of those people who are being killed in Gaza by Hamas's own rockets, but they're okay with that because in their view, well, that's more martyrs who are going to heaven.
It plays right into their public relations or whatever you call it, policies. They want this, and I've watched enough of their rhetoric. Again, I speak Arabic. I hear things that, other people, who don't speak Arabic can't understand. They brag about it. They demand it. In the war before this one, they actually were asking people to go to the roofs of their homes, and when the bombs fall, because they wanted the Israeli pilots or something to see them, or the drones to see them, hoping it will stop it. I mean, who asks their civilian population to do this? They only Hamas does. But here's the other thing that they said, and I want to address it, and I hope I'm not taking time, but I think it's important that people like them hear this from me. For many years, and even me, subscribe to the theory that you can attack Israel and criticize it, but that's not anti-Semitism. In the last couple of years, and I think with this last crisis, I totally do not subscribe to it, and I consider it nonsense. And I understand now why, when you attack Israel, it is an act of anti-Semitism. And when you attack Zionism specifically too, it's an act of anti-Semitism. Here is why. Because Zionism is the concept that the Jewish people have to live in their homeland. They have to return, they have to be in their homeland, and they have to be sovereign in their homeland. And given the history of the Jewish people, that is the only thing. I'm afraid if I was a Jew, I would be afraid to live in a country where others, maybe except the United States, but given what's happening in the United States, I would be concerned as well. I would want to live in a place where I have sovereignty, where I feel like I'm with fellow Jews, that my rights are respected, that people understand me. And that's why the state of Israel and the concept of Zionism is important. So when you attack the concept of Zionism, you can criticize policies, we can talk all day long, all month long about policies and criticize policies and talk about alternatives in a rational way, but that's not how it usually works. Usually it's, spoken about in terms of good and evil, conspiracies and all of that stuff. So when you attack Zionism, when you attack that concept, you're attacking the right of the Jewish people to live in sovereignty in their homeland, and that's why it is anti-Semitic. That's why it is anti-Semitic. And on the left, people like Cara, and what was the name of her co-host?
Lindsay.
Whatever.
Cara and Lindsay. I don't want to be accused of not saying their names because they didn't mention my name once. But Cara and Lindsay need to understand that, because the left nowadays says, oh, it's okay to criticize Zionism. It's okay to say things about Zionism, but that's different. That's not anti-Semitism. It is anti-Semitism for that reason, because you're attacking the concept of the sovereignty of the Jewish people in their own homeland. And they need to understand that. And, things like I'm not going to talk, there's the falafel thing, right? So there is this thing, Nehemiah probably is more familiar with it. Palestinians have this beef with, how can Israelis call falafel like the Israeli dish, right? The Israeli national food, right?
Yeah, but it's not. Ironically, schnitzel is Israel's national dish.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Falafel is for the tourists, but falafel actually comes from the Copts in Egypt, that the Copts would observe Lent, and so they wouldn't eat meat for 40 days, and so they came up with the falafel.
Exactly, but here is the bigger point. So, and again, I always go back to the Mizrahi Jews. Of course, falafel would be a national dish in Israel, even if schnitzel weren't, because you have a million Mizrahi Jews who lived in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Egypt, who loved falafel. And when Arabs kicked them out and sent them to Israel, that became where they cooked that food. That became their national food.
Yeah.
And so there is this dismissal, like when people like Cara and Lindsay talk about Israel, what they don't understand is that there is this massive, I wouldn't say it's an Judeo-Arab heritage
Yeah.
that those people are indigenous to that land. They are as indigenous to the Middle East as any Arab,
Yeah.
regardless of religion, right? And so that's one thing they need to also understand, that it's a very nuanced thing, this whole situation, and they don't
Yeah.
get.
Goes
So
back to the irony of the name Nuance.
Yeah.
So one of the things you mentioned anti-Semitism, and one of the things they said in this video that I was like rolling my eyes. And Jabra, you mentioned in your PhD you studied logical fallacies. So I want you to talk for a minute about the etymological fallacy, because they committed that. They said something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing and I may be misquoting them, but they said something to the effect of Palestinians are Semites and therefore
Yes.
for the genocide of Jews can't be anti-Semitic because the Palestinians are Semites. So tell us what the etymological fallacy is, how that applies.
Yes. So, well, here is the thing. When it comes to the Palestinians are, yes, we can, on the face of it, we are a Semitic people, but that doesn't mean that Semitic people cannot commit anti-Semitism. To be a Semite doesn't mean you're, basically the etymological fallacy, just because I'm something means that I'm immune to being anti that thing, right? And that is the fallacy of it. The fact of the matter is, even though Palestinians and Arabs are Semites, they are of the Semitic race, they have an ideology, they have been taught an ideology that is against, fellow Semites. So they become anti-Semites. So being something doesn't make you immune to it. And that's the fallacy in that whole argument.
Well, I mean, I would say that, so the term anti-Semite was a euphemism that was used in Europe in the 19th century. The original term was Jew hater, and they felt it was more respectable to be called an anti-Semite than a Jew hater. And the fact that there are other Semites who are also anti-Semitic, it really is Jew hater, right? That's really what it means.
Exactly.
And so that's why there's this etymological fallacy. Well, literally, it means Semite, and they're Semites. It has nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on Jabra's point that the irony of Zionism is that it is actually Easternized and Orientalized Jews. And Nehemiah can also speak to this, right? The Mati Friedman, who's a quite famous Israeli journalist, has written a lot about this. I mean, the dominant, you guys were talking, we've been talking about food, the dominant foods, the dominant music, the dominant dance is Mizrahi. Israel has become.
What Mizrahi is, I know, but the audience may not.
Okay, so Mizrahi, right, means in Hebrew Eastern, right, and it was originally trying to be an epithet, but I think over time it's become a source of pride, right? Jewish communities, truly historically indigenous to the Middle East. Yes, the land of Israel, but also other Arab countries, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Morocco, on and on. But these Jewish communities, Mizrahi, Eastern Jewish communities, developed their own Jewish cultures and traditions and brought those to Israel. But they are the dominant cultural force in Israel today. And so even those Ashkenazi Jews immigrating to Israel fold in to a Mizrahi, Middle Eastern Jewish culture because of the geography. So this irony of, well, Israel is this, and Zionism is this Western settler, colonial, imperial, alien. It's so untrue in every domain of academic inquiry.
Yeah.
Israel has become a Middle Eastern Jewish nation in its region. I mean, over time, of course, in the early days, we could talk about that separately. The early days was dominated by the Ashkenazi elite. Ben Gurion is, you know, the most famous. But nowadays, if you go on Israeli radio, you're going to hear a lot the dominance of Mizrahi Jewish music.
So
Yeah.
I don't disagree with your conclusions, but I want to I think I would represent it a little bit differently. For 2,000 years, and in some places more than 2,000 years, Jews who are only indigenous to the land of Israel, not to Yemen, not to Turkey, not to Iraq. They're indigenous. Jew means from those from Judea, from the kingdom of Judah. Jews were exiles in many different lands all over the world. Everybody knew we were exiles. We were taken as slaves by the Romans, and we were driven out in different situations over hundreds of years, actually. So Jews who were exiles in Yemen developed a different culture over time than the Jews who were exiles in Lithuania, and the Jews who were exiles in Spain, and the Jews who were exiles in Iraq. And they developed certain foods that were more Middle Eastern if they were exiles in Iraq. But it didn't matter if you were a Jew in Yemen, Iraq, Lithuania, or France. You had the same set of prayers, more or less. There were slight variations, but in those prayers, you prayed next year in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
That was universal throughout the Jewish world. Every Jewish synagogue throughout the world, just as the Muslims have the Qibla, which faces Mecca, Jews throughout the world, no matter where they were, have their synagogues facing Jerusalem. So Jews are indigenous to Israel alone, and there always was this desire and yearning to return to the land of Israel. And Jews were able to that's what Zionism is, the ability to actualize that return to Zion, in the land of Zion, beginning really in the 19th century and into the 20th and 21st century. That's what Zionism is.
Yeah, it is. And here is the thing that I've probably said in earlier episodes. Those Mizrahi Jews, you know, the word Mizrahi is what we say in Arabic, Mashriqi. It's basically the same, Mashriqi, Mizrahi, Mashriqi. So that those Jews who stayed in the region are more indigenous and Arab in a way, and I say Arab in a very, very loose way, but they belong to the land more than many Palestinians. And this will anger so many people, okay? But they've lived there longer. Many Palestinians are a mix from the Crusades, from, you know, the British, the French, you know, we come from different backgrounds. Very few Palestinians are purely like belonging to the land or their heritage. Jews, Iraqi Jews, Lebanese Jews, of course, because the governments, from the Romans to the Turks, kept them confined in those areas and restricted their travel. They became more endogenous than many Arabs, who, you know, not to mention Arab origins from the Turks, from the Mamluks, from the Seljuks, from all of those invading armies that came to the region. Arab heritage is a very complex thing, but Jewish heritage has stayed stable, and because Jews intermarry more heavily than, you know, Arabs and Christians do, they are the originals to the land. And that's what Arabs fail to understand. And as kids, when we were growing up, we were never taught that. I was never taught there were, you know, close to 1 million Arab Jews, you know, or, you know, Jews who spoke Arabic. I wouldn't say Arab Jews because I want to acknowledge their identity as Jews, but Arab Jews who speak Arabic, who were there, we were never taught that. Many Arabs and Palestinians do not know that. They do not know the story. They do not know the story of the Farhud in Iraq, what Nasser did to the Jews of Egypt, what was done to Libyan Jews, or any of that stuff. We're not taught it. And so we have this story that is, and mentioning stories, just yesterday on some social platform, in an Egyptian school, it showed a video of little kids being taught the story about the bad neighbor and the good neighbor, and the good neighbor is sitting in his house, and then the bad neighbor comes in and he violently kicks away the good neighbor out of his house and takes over his house. And I was watching that and I was like, oh my gosh, they are like, the indoctrination at this age is just so hard to get rid of. It becomes entrenched. And it is really an education of hate. Like they're, coaching it in childish terms, good neighbor, bad neighbors, they say, the good ammo and the bad ammo. And but still it is a language of hate. It's not teaching anything. It's just teaching you to hate. And it's horrible and disgusting. And I think that's why with this crisis I decided, I always restrained myself. I didn't really say anything about anything. And with 710, I was like, no, it's time for me to reach out and talk and express these things and say them, because people need to hear this. And it's going to be hard on fellow Palestinians. It's going to be hard on the left elements that support Palestinians, but they need to hear it, because I'm unfiltered. I'm speaking authentically about it. I'm saying the feelings of my heart. And it's important that people hear that. I don't want to filter anything. I don't want to hide it. I don't want to put a veneer on it, as that guy says in the article in Newsweek, Ahmed Al-Khatib. I don't want any of that. I want people to hear the unfiltered truth perspective from someone who's lived it. And that's how I feel it.
Well, Jabra, I want to thank you so much for being able to come on and say your piece in response. And Jason and Nehemiah, I'm so glad you came in to offer some really important perspective to this thing. I think it's really important that when, look, I'm not an expert, but in the 90s, I did a lot of research on nationalism, the Third Reich, the Holocaust denial. As a matter of fact, one of the more interesting things in my life was coming across Michael Shermer's magazine, Skeptic, in which they did a whole, basically, takedown of Holocaust denial literature, which at the time was gaining a lot of steam in the 90s. And then to later have Michael Shermer on my program to tell him about that, which was a great honor. But it was really important because a lot of this stuff was floating around college campuses in the 1990s as well. And Noam Chomsky was an apologist for this stuff. And so this has been around for quite some time. And now we've really seen it it's just, I was shocked at how just with the response that the left had, and progressives and stuff like that. I guess we shouldn't be surprised, but I do think, really honestly, I mean, I think it's so important that we just don't let look, religion can be an ideology. Religious fundamentalism can cause you to do a lot of bad things, but secular fundamentalism can do the same thing. And I think it's really, really important that you don't fall into the same trap. For many people who, look, I was an atheist for 12 years, okay? So, but I never fell for these traps of trying to make secularism or Marxism or any of these other things my religion, because I recognize that that's what they were as well, and I was against that. And so when I see a lot of people on the left making these left-wing causes their religion, it makes them, they almost sound like fundamentalists to me, and it just kind of scares me. And all forms of fundamentalism, I think can be, but there's aspects of fundamentalism that can be good, but there is also an ugly side to fundamentalism too, that we have to guard against in both religion and in the secular world. So I want to just wrap this up, but I want everybody just to say a final word that you want to share with the audience. So we'll start with Nehemiah, and then Jabra, and then Jason.
Well, what radical leftists have in common with Hamas is that they're ideologically possessed. There's no room for compromise, and they talk about coexistence, and but really it's our way or the highway. And Zionism, from its very inception, there was this book written by Theodor Herzl called Alt Neuland, the old world.
Love that book.
And he describes this Zionist utopia where Jews are living in the land together with non-Jews. and together they build a utopian society. So having over 1 million Muslims who are part of Israel isn't a compromise because we can't get rid of them. It's part of the dream. And that's not part of Hamas's dream. Hamas's vision is to kill all the Jews and they'll have it only for themselves. And in that respect, I agree with you, Stephen, that that's a form of fundamentalism which is uncompromising and has no room for coexistence. And that's what, you know, that to me is this ideological possession is what's so disturbing about the radical left.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Nehemiah, and Steve. I think what I hear you say is what in Mormon speech we say, relying on the arm of the flesh. All of these other ideologies, there is no center. The problem with the left, especially with the atheist left, is that there is no center. There is no guiding light, I feel, to it. And that's I mean, they called me a conservative and what was it, alt-right or something like that. So I'm none of that. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, and I believe that, you know, everything I do, everything I say is guided by the teachings of the Savior, you know, by the teachings and, of Hashem, as the Jews would say. I'm guided by that. I don't care about ideology. I'm not trapped in it. All I care about, my position from the very beginning is we need, as Palestinians, as Arabs, to think out of the box, to think nonviolence, to think, how can we build trust with our Jewish brothers and sisters? How can we live together, not in one state, but how can we live side by side and have trade and have good relationships and enrich each other? And what makes this painful is that both our cultures are very similar, very open. And I felt, and I'm not going to speak for all Arabs or all Palestinians. This is my personal feeling here. Every time I watch Jewish programming or read Jewish books, as I said before, I'm an avid student of the Torah. I feel the greatness and love and the possibilities that can happen if we reach out to our Jewish brothers and sisters. I truly mean that. I truly feel it. I know it. And my goal is to help others feel that and see it the way not exactly the way I do, but I want them to cast away the prejudice, cast away the indoctrination that I know all of us Arabs, Palestinians, Christian and Muslim have grown up in. I want us to cast it away and look at the problem from a new perspective and have peace and end this bloodshed and end this generational loss and all the dead children on both sides. And that's what I want. That's why I say it. Just stop relying on the arm of the flesh and ideologies and just look at it, with the eyes of, the Savior, the eyes of Christ. And if you're an atheist, I don't know how to help you. I guess I need to do more work on how atheists believe and think, but this is my perspective. That's my context.
I can help with that because I still tell people I still think like an atheist because I was an atheist for 12 years and I'm just kind of getting back into faith. So actually, I will say you guys said some things about atheism that wanted me to push back a little bit today, but that's okay. We can say that for another day. Jason Olson, when you stop and think about it, really this whole thing started when you first came on my program to talk about the burning book. And that was really your remarkable story about being raised in this Jewish home. And then reading the Book of Mormon and recognizing that because of the Book of Mormon, you believed and told your rabbi that I believe Jesus is the Messiah by reading the Book of Mormon. And then when you turned 18, you converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But you also are a Jew. You are a Jew thoroughly. And so you've been able to bring these two worlds together in your beautiful book, The Burning Book. Jason, I want to thank you so much for everything. I'd like for you to share your final words with the audience here.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. This is such a beautiful dialogue. I really feel it's inspired for us four to be together. I mean, it's kind of strange that that Jabra has gotten so much heat. I mean, I think, I mean, I think that these sisters, you know, they really want to attack. They want to attack me. I mean, I'm the Jew. Nehemiah is the Jew, and they're just like, I guess they're using Jabra as a punching bag, which is just not fair at all. But I want to say that good religion will lead us to love. I shared this scripture with Jabra. It's from the Torah, from Leviticus 19, and this is my kind of bleeding heart Zionism. I'm a Zionist, but I'm kind of a, you know, I have a lot of compassion for my Arab brothers and sisters, which is I'm really dialoguing in love with Jabra. It says, and if a stranger sojourn with thee in your land, ye shall not oppress him. But the stranger that dwelleth with you shall be unto you as one born among you, and thou shalt love him as thyself. For ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. This is straight from the Torah. I feel this love toward Jabra. Jabra is from the land that I love, and Nehemiah loves, and that we feel deeply connected to. Jabra is somebody, you know, that I can feel as one born among you, that he has connected himself to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the Jewish people. And Jabra and I were discussing this. It's not about the Jewish people as an ethnicity that makes Zionism so important. It's that there was a revelation and a covenant between God and the Jewish people on Mount Sinai, and the Jewish people through all the exile and the centuries of persecution have been carrying this revelation and this covenant contained in the Torah, and they're bringing the Torah and these righteous principles, righteous laws, righteous instructions, you know, to love your neighbor as yourself, to the land of Israel. And that's the beautiful thing. Hamas is completely opposed to this vision, so they got to go. But there's something left here, and you know, and it's amazing to me that Jabra has adopted the scripture and teachings of the Jewish people, and it's a miracle.
Well, I think it's a miracle that brought us all together here to have these conversations. I do think very highly of all three of you gentlemen and what you bring to the table here. And also just a message to Cara. You know, just so everybody know, Cara is a friend. Cara has been on my program, and I put her on the hot seat. And then I went on Cara's program, and she put me on the hot seat. So her and I do come from different worldviews, but we've both been respectful to each other. And we're not afraid to ask each other the hard questions and have the hard conversations. So that's what I respect about Cara. And of course, she decided she was going to put a response video. She was going to put me and Jabra and on using my thumbnail on her thumbnail, and then taking my segment. So I'm like, well, I guess we have to respond. I mean, I don't know what else we could do under these circumstances. So I hope nothing personal, Cara. I know we have disagreements, but this is how we can hash these things out. Come, let us reason together. My brothers, I love you all. Thanks for coming on the show today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And
Thank
Jabra,
you.
Jabra, what we need to do is we just need to get a timer for you sometimes. But I think it was important you did most of the talking today, because this was directed towards you. And I really look forward to doing future panels like this. By the way, I'm still have this idea about maybe reading through the Book of Mormon with Nehemiah and I, and having different people come on. I think that would be
That would be cool.
I think it would be. I'm really tempted to maybe we do something, Nehemiah. So let's talk about maybe something early next year, maybe starting like a program where we read through the Book of Mormon and we have different people like you guys.
Next year is in the Come Follow Me, which is our equivalent to the Torah cycle. It's the Book of Mormon.
I know.
So
I was thinking of doing like a Come Follow Me on Mormon book reviews with Dr. Nehemiah.
Wow.
Yeah, and I haven't read cover to cover Book of Mormon from cover to cover, so this would be my first time doing it on my podcast. And Nehemiah has like read it 3 times already. So yeah, I've read probably about 80% of the Book of Mormon, but I haven't read it cover to cover. So this would be my opportunity to do it.
And you'll have the opportunity to pray for a testimony as well.
Nehemiah, I'm going to send you a file of the Book of Mormon selections from the Book of Mormon in Hebrew. How about that?
Wow, that'd be
I'll
great.
send that to you. I'll email it to you tonight.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's beautiful. And by the way, folks, there is going to be a Hebrew version of the Book of Mormon that will be released soon, and that will be exclusively announced here on Mormon Book Reviews. Don't have a date yet, but it should be coming down the pike soon. So we're very excited about that as well. So folks, tell us what you think. Leave your comments. Let us know. Don't forget, there's going to be links in the description to some of the stuff that was there. So you guys send me the stuff we talked about. Send me links. I'll make sure they're put into the show notes. For those of you who'd like to financially support the channel, of course, we have links there as well, including the merch store. And you can support us on PayPal, Venmo, as well as Patreon. And I want to thank all of you who are financially supporting the channel. Couldn't do it without you. Remember, the most important thing is this, though, is remember, all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.